Okay, hello everyone. It's brilliant to see you all through the computer. I am Geeta Selvaratnam, and this paper is written along with Professor David Nicol, both of us from the Adam Smith Business School. So this is about two-stage exams from an inner feedback perspective. And I was first of all very heartened to realize that from Moira's talk, that this actually relates to 6 out of the 7 principles the university's learning and teaching. So this is really very nice. So let's start. So this is the plan, a very quick plan. So what is two-stage exams, first of all? So some of you might have already come across this. This is when I would give a question which the students will work on their own individually. And then after that, the students will work on the same question in small groups of 3 or 4. Now this two-stage exam setup can be formative or summative. This particular paper uses data from a summative exam, but in the same course, I have actually used it in a formative style. So in every lecture, I would give 1 or 2 questions where the students will think about it and jot down some points on their own. And then they will talk to some of their colleagues or peers who are sitting around them in 3 or 4. And then sometimes I open up the class for them to give their points, share their points. So in our new learning and teaching hub, I think the classrooms will be much more conducive to do this sort of thing. And even if we are doing online lectures, you can also try and do allow students to actually discuss things in small groups. So basically you work on a question individually and then work on the same question or something very similar in small groups of 3 or 4. Sorry. So the benefits are, of course, quite a lot of benefits. First of all, this allows students to be actively engaged. And if you look at videos that are out there on YouTube, two-stage exams, you will see students very actively engaged, discussing their ideas and all that. And sometimes, you can also set questions which require more discussions. So it's not like a one-word answer that they can give, but where students have to really think carefully about how they can explain it, justify their answers, and things like that. Another point is that if you are going to use this in a summative exam format, the students have told me that this is much less stressful and this anxious sort of atmosphere that prevails in an exam is reduced. So this was quite a nice thing for me to realize when I did this, gave them this two-stage exam. Now the 2 points that our paper is more concerned about, our project with David and myself, is that these two-stage exams allow students to enhance their learning experience. They actually learn quite a lot through this process. And the other thing is that it allows the students to generate their own feedback immediately. So they don't have to hang around for 2 or 3 weeks while I am marking their exams. They are able to generate their own feedback. So we will look into this a little bit more. The next thing, so this paper is about two-stage exams from an inner feedback perspective. So first point I want to make is feedback is feedback only when it is internalized. So otherwise there's no point. We keep calling teachers' comments as feedback, but to be very honest, it becomes feedback only when the students internalize whatever the teacher is saying. Now, we are going to use a framework, theoretical framework that David Nicol has put forward. He has a paper on this. And that is when, where he is saying that inner feedback is a feedback when students are able to compare their current knowledge with some reference value. So the teacher, as a teacher, my business would be to allow the students to realize somehow what their current knowledge is, and then also provide them with some kind of a reference value against which they can compare. And then they will be able to generate very powerful inner feedback for themselves. Now, this reference value can be a lot of things, and teachers' comments, of course, would be can be one of those things that we consider reference value. So students look at their answer, and then they look at the teacher's comments, and then compare the two and generate feedback for themselves. Now, I won't go into all these things, different types. We will just look at the two-stage setup. So here is the current knowledge that the students would now accumulate when they are preparing for the exam. So they will use their lecture notes, reading material that I have given, and then also, use their normal general knowledge and knowledge from other courses and so forth. And then they go into the two-stage exam and attempt the question that has been given on their own individually. So this is one of the things I have now given them to realize what the current state of their knowledge is. And then this two-stage exam also allows them, gives them a reference point. And that happens because they are going to do the same question again in a small group. So once they get into a group setup, they will discuss as a group. So there's a group discussion, and then they will also write the answer as a group, So there are two things happening. And while this is happening, with or without their knowledge, the individual students, the brain, the head is churning away, doing comparisons about how they have attempted the answer, and also generating very valuable inner feedback while they are doing this. And this will update their knowledge. So as they are doing this exam itself, when they are coming out, they are going to have this inner feedback generated themselves, and their current state of knowledge will be increased. Now, after 2 or 3 weeks, along comes the teacher's comments, and then of course that will also add to their knowledge, of course. Now, the research questions that we are interested in, I'm just going to give you the questions that we are attempting in this particular paper. So what internal feedback, what sort of feedback do students actually generate during the two-stage exams? And the other question is, how does their self-generated feedback compare with the comments that a teacher would provide? So these are the two research questions we are interested in. Now, the study that we performed this research on was in a course which I was teaching at the time, Economics of Poverty, Discrimination and Development, a very nice optional honors undergraduate course, which had 24 students at that time. But this is sort of, becoming more and more popular. And another colleague has now taken over this course. We have more students now. The question I gave for them to attempt as a two-stage exam was this: evaluate the weaknesses of a new multidimensional poverty index and suggest how it might be improved. The point is, this is a very popular, very good index. So it's not like it is filled with weaknesses or anything like that. So they had learned what this index is. But I am also challenging them to think about any weaknesses, loopholes that this index might have, and then also think of ways in which they think it might be improved. So there's no one correct answer to this. And if the student is just saying, oh, this is a weakness, or this is how it might improve, no one has to agree to this, because as I said, this is quite a good index already. So they really need to be able to justify their answer and support what they are trying to say. So it was a real summative exam. making up 15% of the total grade. And also it was over 2 hours. And this exam, so two-stage exam, again, the students would have done this question, this MPI question on their own first, and then as a group. But on top of that, for this research purpose, and also I have realized it's a very good learning process if we do this, we also gave a reflective task to the students. So the students do their individual work, and then they do, we gave them some survey questions to reflect upon. Then they went on to do the group task, and again, they were given some reflective questions. So this actually turned out to be quite an important design, which allowed students to actually reinforce this in the the inner feedback that they were generating as they were going along. So the reflective questions that are important for what I'm talking about today is, after the individual work, we asked them, were you aware of any weaknesses in your work, in your answer? And if there was an expert around the place, what might you ask them? So these are the questions we asked. Then after the group work, we put forward some more reflective questions. So as you can see, how did the group answer differ from your own? Did you learn anything? Did you realize any weaknesses in your answer that you did not realize before? How might you improve your answer? What did you learn that will inform your future work, and so forth. Now, of course, when you all are doing the two-stage exams, you might think of different reflective questions, but these are the type of questions which might be helpful, we found. Now, the students wrote quite a lot because the reflective questions were also graded. So they had a lot of incentives to write good feedback, good answers to these reflective questions. And I put everything in a big Excel sheet, and we had to code the thing, their answers. And these are the 3 types of feedback that we thought of segregating the feedback into. So the content feedback was all about what I had asked them about the index. So what are the weaknesses? What are the suggestions? So anything that any feedback they were talking about related to this were called content feedback. Then the students wrote quite a lot about how they might present their answers, the structure, how strong the arguments were, whether the examples were detailed enough, did they give nice examples, and so forth. So this we called writing process feedback, so WF. The other important feedback is the self-regulatory feedback, that anything that the students were talking about, which will help them in the future, not only this exam, any other exam or anything else that they might have to do in life in general. So all that would go into self-regulatory feedback. So I will give a few examples as we go along. Scott might stop me at any point. So therefore, I'm going to give you the summary of our findings first. So first of all, we realized that even without the teacher, immediately after their individual answer, once they have worked on it, the students were able to identify their own weaknesses themselves. Then, once they got into the group setup, they were able to update their own learning, basically answer, find solutions to the weaknesses that they had identified. And also, of course, add the new things that they might not have realized. Some students might not realize their weaknesses till they see another good piece of good work. But mostly, you know, the students themselves realize their weaknesses. The other point is that we found that the students were able to produce feedback that was so much richer and deeper compared to what the teacher could give them, the teacher's comments, because, you know, the students were able to be more specific in the feedback that they were generating, whereas the teacher could just say, Things like your structure should be better, the arguments, you should have better support uh, for your answers and things like that, whereas the students might be able to actually figure out how to actually make their answer better. The other thing is self-regulatory feedback, very difficult for the teacher to provide because I don't know how much they are planning before they put the pen down on the paper, or whether they have read a lot of books or not. You know, only the student knows it. So the student will be able to generate a lot of feedback, self-regulatory feedback, which will be useful for them compared to what the teacher could. Then, of course, group work, you know, students usually quite shy of doing group work, but through this two-stage exam setup and also formatively, because they were doing it in the class, the students were able to realize how important it is to work and discuss in groups. And also, whenever you're going into a group setup, a group work situation, think for yourself, do some work on your own before you join the group. So this is another important skill they got. Now, as I have already mentioned, we realized the importance of reflective questions because the reflective questions actually reinforce the inner feedback that the students were generating themselves anyway, right? Sometimes they might generate this feedback but not realize it. But because we made them actually think about it and write it down, it reinforces it, cements whatever they have learned. And I would actually use this idea not only for two-stage exams, but from as many learning techniques that I use. So because I find that it's quite an important thing to do. The other thing is our design, by having the reflective questions, made the feedback generation and the learning process explicit. So the students were able to put it down. And this also allowed us to actually do the research on this and show how learning is benefiting, learning and feedback is benefiting through the two-stage exam. Okay. So now number of feedback. So I still have not seen the reminder from Scott, so I keep batting on. So I am looking at the number of comments that the students have generated, comparing it with the teacher's comments, number of comments. And as you can see, the content feedback, the writing feedback, and the self-regulatory feedback, in all three situations, the students actually generated more comments compared to the teacher. Obviously, the teacher has talked a lot about the content, but also about writing. Self-regulatory feedback, the thing is the teacher didn't say anything, that is me. Whereas the students actually, was the highest number of comments were related to self-regulatory feedback, which was very, very heartening for us. But sometimes, you know, it's not as though it has to be zero from the teacher. Sometimes I might be able to realize the student has not read enough or has not really planned anything properly, or timed, may not have timed the exam well enough. So I do sometimes give self-regulatory feedback, but obviously not as much. So not only the comments, not only that the students are giving more comments, but their comments are actually much deeper and more meaningful, more specific than what the teacher can provide. So I have just given two examples out of the many. So the teacher, let's say, is saying, oh, scope for more thinking. So basically I'm telling there's more stuff out there. You haven't written enough content. You haven't thought of enough weaknesses in the index and how you might be able to improve. Whereas the student is writing exactly how they can actually, what are the weaknesses they could have talked about, how they could have, what are the solutions, or what sort of improvements they could have suggested, and so forth. Then I'm also writing something about writing. So should they explain and justify your answers better? So as I mentioned before, for this particular question, this is quite an important aspect. And here the students are able to see how they could have explained things much better. and how they could have supported their answers more strongly. So this is quite nice, and we could find plenty of examples like this if you go through my data sheet on the Excel. Okay, so I'm giving a few more. So after the individual submission, the students were able to identify quite a lot of weaknesses themselves, as I mentioned. So for the content, they are saying I would have missed some points. Maybe I didn't think of enough points that I could have written about, and whether they had understood the methodology of working out the index correctly. Now in the writing, many students actually wrote about this. They were thinking that their structure may not be very good, and whether they explained things clearly enough. They didn't think that was the case. So they were able to actually identify their own weaknesses. So we actually had in total 67 such comments where students identifying their own weaknesses after the individual submission itself. You know, this is even before they went into the groups. And once they got into the group, so as I said, 67 concerns were raised. And out of the 67, when we read the reflective answers after the group stage, we found out that students had actually found solutions themselves to about 48 of these 67 concerns. So this is quite incredible, to be honest. So that was very good to see. So after the group submissions, our reflective questions allowed students to learn more about themselves. There was a good learning experience through these reflective questions that we were able to elicit. And as you can see, I learned that there were more to add to the improvement. So they didn't think of enough things that they could have said about how to improve the index. So this is the content feedback. And in the writing one, the example I picked for structure, I did not come up with the structure, my teammates did. It was actually, I didn't go to that depth as the group members did. Then finally, we have the self-regulatory feedback. So as I mentioned already, there were 53 self-regulatory feedback, which was quite a lot. So on average, there were more than 2 points that the students raised for themselves. What we thought of was, because self-regulatory feedback was quite an important aspect, let us break it down, make further subcategories out of these. And this is what we came up with. So we had 6 different categories looking at what the students had written about. So as you can see, 3 students, 3 comments about I need to have read more widely without just sticking to the lecture notes and the recommended reading. Then 5 students were talking about I should have planned my answer properly. So they had actually written that, because when they were in the group setup, they would have seen how the others were planning before they actually wrote down the answer, you know, so, and realized this is actually quite a nice thing to do without just starting to write straight away. Now, I am one of these people who don't plan enough. So even I am learning by reading what the students have written. Some of the students did write about their language skills and say that maybe my vocabulary was not good, not as good as my peers. So maybe I should do something about it and improve my language skills. The students also realized group skills. I was very happy to see this. They realized how important what group work can actually give to you, how it can add to your own learning and so forth. The main self-regulatory categories was the writing process, how to present your answer, which was quite important. And then the other thing which I may not have expected so many students to write, but it was really very nice that they have realized this, that when they are presented with a question, there are so many different approaches. How do you approach this question, you know? Do you just answer this from the textbook, what the textbook has said? So different questions might require students to take different approaches and look at the question from different angles and things like that. So this is something that the students have also learned. Very nice. And I am hoping that the slides will be uploaded in some way after the conference. So I will make these available to people so that you can read these comments if you want. But you know, this is very course related, so I don't want to be reading this out properly. So if any of you want to take a photo or look at the slides later on about two-stage exams and inner feedback, some references. Okay, so hopefully I have actually made it in time. When I was practicing, I took much longer. It took about 30 minutes or something. So thank you, everyone.
Okay, thanks very much, Geeta.
How much time did I take?
You took just about the right amount of time. We started a little bit behind as we came out of Moira's presentation. We had a few questions there, so we're doing good. So if anyone has any questions, then feel free to drop them into the Q&A, and even if they come in after Geeta's finished on the stage, as it were, she'll still be able to, or we'll still be able to make sure that the questions reach her and she can maybe supply a written answer. I have a question. So this presumably seems like something that the students would have probably not done before, and I wondered whether you had any strategies for presenting it to the students as something we're going to get them to do without priming them to expect it to be uncomfortable or different or somehow not.
Yes, that's a very good question. So when we first thought about it, I was also pretty nervous because it was a summative exam and this is the first such thing that the students were doing. So as I mentioned before, you know, all through this lecture, so every lecture the students had a two-stage sort of setup in a formative way. So every single lecture, I would give them a question, get them to work on it on their own, and then discuss with their peers. So they were, and tell them as we went along the importance of this and so forth, you know. So they got used to this a little bit, and also the shy students who wouldn't talk started talking more and more in the small groups. So I could see it happening during the lecture. This is a good learning experience for them anyway. And as I said, sometimes I used to open up the flow. And then some of the shy students also realized actually they have some very good points to contribute. So they will start talking. So that is one thing I did. The other thing is, before the summative exam itself, you know, I dedicated a bit of time explaining to them how this is going to happen. And got them prepared. So, I mean, as I said, I was a little bit nervous, but it actually went very well. So no hitches at all. I would say if it's going to be a summative exam, make sure that you have a big enough hall. So we had a nice hall with high ceiling and the students could sit quite comfortably in groups. And we arranged the chairs at 3 by 3, and I didn't put them into groups or anything. They came and just sat in their chairs, and then that was their group. And they did the individual question first, but you know, silently a little bit, and then of course, then I gave some time. So I would also recommend that you think carefully about the time you give for each question, the time you give for reflective questions, and so forth. And be prepared to run around a little bit. So if it's a big enough class, you should get 1 or 2 helpers maybe. Because, you know, it's not nice for students to keep this big sheet of paper individual and then on top of the group and all. So after the individual, I collected the answers. Then I gave the reflective questions, collected it. So they were not hanging on to these things, putting it under their table or something. So that's my answer.
Okay, great. Thanks very much.